The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in August of 1878, and Lillian Crawford knew before she opened it that her husband was dead. She stood in the doorway of their modest house on the edge of Gonzales, Texas, holding the envelope with hands that should have trembled but didn't, and felt nothing except a strange lightness in her chest, as if someone had finally unlocked a door she had forgotten existed. Marcus Crawford had been gone for 3 months, traveling to San Antonio on business he never fully explained. Lillian had learned early in their 5-year marriage not to ask questions. Questions led to his cold silences, to the way his jaw would tighten and his eyes would grow distant, to the careful cataloging of her failures as a wife that would follow for days afterward. So she had stopped asking, stopped speaking unless spoken to, stopped existing in any way that might disturb the precise order Marcus demanded of his household. She opened the letter with steady fingers. A stagecoach accident. Instantaneous death. The words blurred together, meaningless except for their finality. Marcus Crawford, 38 years old, prominent businessman of Gonzales, survived by his wife Lillian. No mention of love, of grief, of any emotion at all. Just facts, cold and clean as the man himself had been. Lillian folded the letter carefully and placed it on the small table by the door. Through the window she could see the dusty main street of Gonzales, the buildings shimmering in the August heat. She was 23 years old, and for the first time since she was 18, she was not someone's property. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt that strange lightness again, rising through her like bubbles in water. The funeral was held 3 days later. Lillian wore the black dress Marcus had bought for her 2 years earlier, high-necked and severe, chosen because he said it made her look respectable. She stood beside the grave and accepted condolences from people who had known Marcus but had never really known her. They spoke of what a fine man he had been, how tragic his loss, how difficult this must be for his poor young widow. None of them knew that Marcus had chosen her because she was an orphan with no family to question his courtship, no one to notice when she stopped smiling. None of them knew that he had married her not for love but for the appearance of respectability, for someone to keep his house and serve his meals and never ever contradict him. None of them knew that in 5 years of marriage, he had never once asked what she wanted, what she dreamed of, what she felt. Her first marriage had been a prison without bars. She had been free to walk the streets of Gonzales, to shop at the general store, to attend church on Sundays. But every action had been prescribed, every word monitored, every breath taken with the awareness that Marcus was watching, judging, finding her wanting. She had learned to make herself small, quiet, invisible. She had learned to survive by disappearing. Now Marcus was in the ground, and Lillian stood in the Texas sun feeling the heat on her face, and she realized she didn't know who she was anymore. The girl she had been before Marcus was gone, and the woman he had tried to make her into was a hollow thing, a shell with nothing inside. She would have to discover who Lillian Crawford could become. The will reading happened a week after the funeral. Lillian sat in the lawyer's stuffy office and learned that Marcus had left her almost nothing. The house belonged to his business partner, who had apparently held the deed all along. The money in the bank account was barely enough to live on for a few months. There were debts she hadn't known about, business dealings that had gone sour. Marcus had controlled every aspect of her life, and now she discovered he had been controlling even this, her future after his death. He had made sure she would be dependent, desperate, forced to remarry quickly or face destitution. The lawyer, a thin man named Peterson who had never met her eyes, suggested she might want to consider finding another husband soon. He said it kindly, as if he were offering helpful advice rather than confirming her worst fears. Lillian thanked him politely and left the office. She walked through the streets of Gonzales as the afternoon sun beat down, past the saloons and the general store and the blacksmith shop, and she made a decision. She would not remarry. She would not trade one prison for another, no matter how desperate her circumstances became. She would rather starve as herself than survive as someone else's possession. The question was how to do it. Lillian had no skills that would earn her money in Gonzales. Marcus had never allowed her to work, and her education had been limited. She could read and write and do sums, but that was all. She could cook and clean and sew, but those were skills every woman had. They wouldn't set her apart, wouldn't earn her independence. She needed to leave Gonzales. The thought came to her suddenly, stopping her in the middle of the street. She needed to go somewhere no one knew her, somewhere she could become someone new. But where? And how? Lillian returned to the house that was no longer hers and began to go through Marcus's papers. She had never been allowed to look at them before, but Marcus was dead and his rules no longer applied. She searched methodically, looking for anything that might help her, and finally found it tucked in the back of his desk drawer. A land deed. 200 acres in West Texas, near a town called Redemption. Marcus had won it in a card game years ago before they were married. He had never mentioned it, had probably forgotten about it entirely. Lillian held the deed in her hands and felt something shift inside her chest. This was it. This was her way out. She sold everything she could over the next 2 weeks. The furniture, the dishes, Marcus's clothes, all of it went to pay his debts and buy her passage west. She kept only what she could carry in a single trunk: her own clothes, a few books, the land deed, and the small amount of money she had managed to save. The day she left Gonzales, no one came to see her off. She sat alone in the stagecoach as it rattled out of town, and she didn't look back. The journey west took 2 weeks. Lillian traveled through the heart of Texas, watching the landscape change from the green hills around Gonzales to the flatter, drier country beyond. The other passengers changed at each stop, a rotating cast of cowboys and settlers and traveling salesmen. She spoke to none of them unless necessary, keeping herself small and quiet out of habit. But at night, lying in cramped boarding house rooms, she would place her hand on her chest and feel that lightness again, that sense of possibility. She was moving toward something, even if she didn't know what it was yet. Redemption was smaller than Gonzales, a dusty collection of wooden buildings clustered around a single main street. The stagecoach deposited Lillian at the hotel in the early afternoon, and she stood in the street with her trunk at her feet, looking at what was supposed to be her new home. It didn't look like much. The buildings were weathered by wind and sun. The street was empty except for a few horses tied at hitching posts, and the whole town had an air of barely hanging on. But it was hers, or at least the land near it was, and that made all the difference. She took a room at the hotel and asked the proprietor, a large woman named Mrs. Sullivan, about her land. Mrs. Sullivan looked at the deed and frowned. "That's the old Jennings place," she said. "About 5 miles west of town, hasn't been worked in years. Jennings tried to make a go of it back in '73, but the land's hard and the water's scarce. He gave up and went back east." "Is there a house?" Lillian asked. "There was. Don't know what condition it's in now. You planning to live out there?" "Yes." Mrs. Sullivan studied her for a long moment. Lillian could see the question in her eyes. What is a woman like you doing alone in a place like this? But Mrs. Sullivan didn't ask, and Lillian was grateful. "You'll need help getting out there," Mrs. Sullivan said finally, "and you'll need supplies. There's a general store down the street. Tell them I sent you. And if you need someone to take you out to look at the place, talk to Wade Quinn. He's got a ranch a few miles north of your land. He knows the area better than anyone." Lillian thanked her and went to the general store. She bought what she could afford: flour, coffee, beans, a few tools, matches, a lantern. The storekeeper, an older man with kind eyes, packed everything carefully and told her the same thing Mrs. Sullivan had. If she needed help, Wade Quinn was the man to ask. She found Wade Quinn at the livery stable the next morning. He was shoeing a horse, his back to her as she approached, and her first impression was of size and strength. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms roped with muscle. His dark hair was too long, curling over his collar, and when he straightened and turned to face her, she saw a face that was all hard angles and sun-weathered skin. His eyes were what caught her attention, though. They were a startling gray-blue, pale against his tanned face, and they looked at her with an openness that made her want to step back. No one had looked at her like that in years, as if she were a real person worth seeing. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep and rough, but not unkind. "Mrs. Sullivan told me you might be able to help me get out to my land," Lillian said. She kept her voice steady, professional. "I have a deed to 200 acres west of town. I need to see what condition the property is in." Wade wiped his hands on a rag and looked at her more closely. "You're the new widow," he said. It wasn't a question. "Heard you arrived yesterday." Of course he had. In a town this small, everyone would know everyone else's business. "Lillian Crawford," she said, not offering her hand. Marcus had taught her that respectable women didn't shake hands with men. "Wade Quinn." He paused, then said, "You're talking about the old Jennings place. That's rough land, Mrs. Crawford, not suitable for a woman alone." Lillian felt something tighten in her chest. She had heard variations of that phrase her entire life, not suitable for a woman, as if being female meant being incapable, helpless, in need of constant protection. "Nevertheless, it's my land," she said, her voice cooler now, "and I intend to see it. If you can't help me, I'll find someone who can." Something changed in Wade's expression. The doubt faded, replaced by what might have been respect. "I didn't say I couldn't help," he said. "Just wanted to make sure you knew what you were getting into. I can take you out there this afternoon if you're ready." They left Redemption an hour later, Lillian's trunk loaded in the back of Wade's wagon. She sat on the bench seat beside him, acutely aware of his presence. He was so large he seemed to take up all the available space, and she found herself pressed against the far edge of the seat, trying to maintain a proper distance. Wade didn't try to make conversation, for which she was grateful. He just guided the horses west, following a trail that was barely visible in the scrub grass. The land stretched out around them, flat and brown and empty, broken only by occasional clumps of mesquite and the distant line of hills on the horizon. After about an hour, Wade said, "You from around here originally?" "Gonzales," Lillian said. "I lived there for 5 years." "And before that?" "San Antonio. I grew up in an orphanage there." She didn't know why she told him that. She usually avoided mentioning her past, the years before Marcus, but something about Wade's straightforward manner made it seem safe to answer honestly. "Must have been hard," Wade said. "It was what it was." Lillian folded her hands in her lap. "What about you? Are you from Redemption?" "Colorado originally. Came down to Texas about 10 years ago looking for work. Ended up buying some land and starting a ranch. It's not much, but it's mine." There was pride in his voice when he said that last part, and Lillian understood it. Owning something, being independent, not having to answer to anyone else. She wanted that too, with an intensity that surprised her. The house appeared in the distance after another half hour. It was small. Just one room from what Lillian could see, but it had 4 walls and a roof and a door. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop in front of it, and they both sat for a moment, looking. "Well," Wade said finally, "it's still standing." They climbed down from the wagon and approached the house cautiously. The door was hanging on one hinge and the windows were empty of glass, but the structure itself seemed sound. Inside there was nothing but dust and dead leaves and evidence that various animals had made homes there over the years, but there was also a fireplace and a few pieces of broken furniture and a loft space under the peaked roof that could be used for storage or sleeping. It was rough and dirty and would need a lot of work. It was also hers. Lillian walked through the single room, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. She could see it in her mind. Cleaned and repaired, with curtains at the windows and a fire in the hearth. She could see herself living here, alone and free, answerable to no one. "What do you think?" Wade asked from the doorway. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I think it's perfect," Lillian said. Wade helped her unload her trunk and the supplies she had bought. He checked the well behind the house and reported that it still had water, though she would need to replace the rope and bucket. He examined the fireplace and said it would draw smoke properly once it was cleaned out. He walked the perimeter of the land and told her where the boundaries were, what the soil was like, where she might plant a garden if she could get irrigation working. By the time the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, Lillian's head was spinning with information and plans. Wade had been matter-of-fact about everything, treating her as if she were just another rancher discussing land management, and she found herself relaxing in his presence in a way she never had with Marcus. "I should head back," Wade said as the light turned golden, "but I'll come by tomorrow with some tools and help you get started on repairs. You can't stay out here alone until we get that door fixed and the windows covered." "I can't ask you to do that," Lillian said automatically. "You must have your own work to attend to." Wade shrugged. "Ranch work is never done. Another day won't make a difference. Besides, out here we help our neighbors. That's how people survive." He climbed back into his wagon, then paused and looked down at her. "You sure about this, Mrs. Crawford? It's not too late to go back to town. Maybe find a better situation." Lillian thought about Gonzales, about the empty house that had never been hers, about the 5 years of careful silence and measured steps. She thought about Marcus's grave and the relief she had felt standing beside it. "I'm sure," she said. Wade nodded, as if that settled it. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." Lillian watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing into the gathering dusk. Then she turned and looked at her house, her land, her future. The night was coming on fast, and she would have to make camp inside the ruined house, but she wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Wade returned the next morning with a wagon full of supplies. He brought lumber for the door and windows, nails, a hammer, a saw, and a bucket for the well. He also brought fresh bread and eggs, which he said his housekeeper had insisted on sending. "You have a housekeeper?" Lillian asked as she accepted the food gratefully. "Mrs. Chen. She and her husband work for me. He handles the horses and she keeps the house. They're good people." Wade was already unloading the lumber, his movements efficient and practiced. Lillian set the food aside and came to help, but Wade waved her off. "You start cleaning out the inside. I'll handle this." She wanted to argue, to insist that she could help with the physical labor, but the truth was she didn't know how to build anything. So she took the broom Wade had brought and began sweeping out the interior of the house, watching through the empty windows as he worked. Wade moved with the confidence of someone who had spent his life working with his hands. He measured and cut the lumber precisely, fitted the pieces together, hammered nails with steady strikes. He didn't waste motion or material. By midday, he had hung a new door that opened and closed smoothly, and he was starting on frames for the windows. Lillian made coffee using the supplies she had bought in town and brought Wade a cup. He accepted it with a nod of thanks and sat down in the shade of the house to drink it. "You're good at this," Lillian said, sitting a careful distance away. "Had to learn. Can't afford to pay someone else to do work I can do myself." Wade drank his coffee slowly, looking out over the land. "You thought about what you're going to do out here. 200 acres is too much for one person to work alone, and this isn't farming country anyway." "I don't know yet," Lillian admitted. "I just knew I needed to leave Gonzales. This land was the only asset I had." Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your husband, he wasn't good to you, was he?" The question was so direct, so unexpected that Lillian felt her breath catch. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had even seemed to notice that something might have been wrong in her marriage. "What makes you say that?" she asked carefully. "The way you hold yourself, like you're expecting a blow. The way you flinch when someone moves too fast near you. I've seen it before in horses that have been badly treated. Takes time to teach them that not all humans are cruel." Lillian felt something crack inside her chest. She hadn't cried at Marcus's funeral, hadn't shed a tear through all the weeks of settling his affairs and traveling west. But now, sitting in the Texas dust with this stranger who saw her too clearly, she felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back. "He never hit me," she said, because that seemed important. "Marcus never raised a hand to me." "There's more than one way to hurt someone," Wade said quietly. Lillian looked down at her hands. at the calluses that were starting to form from 2 days of rough work. He chose me because I had no one. He married me because he wanted someone to control, not someone to love, and I let him because I didn't know there was any other way to survive. The words came out in a rush, unexpected and raw. She hadn't meant to say any of it, had meant to keep her past locked away where it couldn't hurt her. But Wade's steady presence, his lack of judgment, made it impossible to maintain her careful walls. "You survived," Wade said. "That's what matters. And now you're here, building something new. That takes courage. Or desperation." Sometimes there's not much difference between the two. Wade finished his coffee and stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Come on, I'll show you how to measure lumber. If you're going to live out here, you need to know how to make repairs yourself." The afternoon passed in a blur of instruction. Wade showed Lillian how to measure and cut wood, how to hammer a nail straight, how to check if something was level. He was patient with her mistakes, matter-of-fact in his corrections, and never once made her feel stupid or incapable. By evening, all the windows had frames and shutters that could be closed against the weather. The house was starting to look like an actual dwelling rather than a ruin. Lillian's hands were blistered, and her back ached, but she felt a satisfaction she had never experienced before. She had helped build this. She had learned new skills, done physical work, created something tangible. Wade packed up his tools as the sun set. "I'll come back day after tomorrow with some furniture. Can't have you sleeping on the floor indefinitely." "You've already done so much," Lillian protested. "I can't keep accepting your help without paying you." "You can pay me back by being a good neighbor," Wade said. "Out here, that's worth more than money. Now, are you staying out here tonight or coming back to town?" "Staying here." Lillian looked at her house, at the solid door and the shuttered windows. "This is my home now. I'm not leaving it." Wade looked as if he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. "Keep the door barred. And if you need anything, my ranch is about 5 miles north. Just follow the trail and you'll run into it eventually." After Wade left, Lillian made herself a simple meal of bread and eggs and ate sitting on the front step of her house, watching the stars come out. The night was full of sounds she didn't recognize. Insects and distant animal calls and the whisper of wind through the grass. It should have been frightening, being alone in the middle of nowhere with no protection. Instead, it felt like freedom. Over the next 2 weeks, Lillian settled into her new life. Wade came by every few days with supplies and help. He brought a bed frame and a mattress, a table and chairs, cooking pots and dishes. He helped her patch holes in the roof and repair the floorboards. He taught her how to maintain the well, and how to start a fire in the fireplace, and how to shoot the rifle he insisted she needed for protection. "From what?" Lillian had asked when he first presented the rifle. "Snakes, coyotes, occasional mountain lion. Mostly snakes." Wade had shown her how to load it, how to aim, how to absorb the recoil. "Hope you never need it, but better to have it and not need it than the reverse." Lillian practiced shooting at targets Wade set up, and she found she had a steady hand and a good eye. The rifle became a familiar weight, a tool like any other. Between Wade's visits, Lillian worked on making the house truly hers. She sewed curtains from fabric she bought in redemption. She whitewashed the interior walls. She planted a small garden near the well, using seeds Wade had given her, though he warned they might not grow in the late summer heat. She learned to be alone with herself, to exist without constantly monitoring her words and actions. She also learned about Wade. He talked while they worked, sharing stories about his ranch and his life in an easy, unself-conscious way. He had come to Texas with nothing, had worked as a ranch hand for years before saving enough to buy his own land. He had built his house and barns himself, breaking wild horses and raising cattle. He had failed and learned and tried again, and now he had something solid, something that would last. He was 27, 4 years older than Lillian. He had never been married, though he didn't say why. He loved the land and the work and the independence of ranch life. He treated Lillian as an equal, teaching her skills without condescension, asking her opinions, respecting her decisions. Lillian found herself looking forward to his visits. When she saw his wagon approaching across the prairie, her heart would lift in a way that both delighted and terrified her. She had sworn she wouldn't remarry, wouldn't let herself become dependent on another person. But what she felt for Wade didn't seem like dependence. It felt like partnership, like friendship, like something she had no name for because she had never experienced it before. One afternoon in early September, Wade arrived with lumber for building a chicken coop. "You need chickens," he announced as he unloaded the wood. "Fresh eggs and eventually meat. I've got extra hens I can bring over once we get this built." "I don't know how to care for chickens, Var," Lillian said. "I'll teach you. It's not complicated." Wade paused, looking at her. "You've learned everything else fast enough. Why should chickens be any different?" They spent the day building the coop together, working side by side in the September heat. Lillian had gotten used to physical labor over the past weeks. Her hands were calloused now, her skin tanned from the sun, her body stronger than it had ever been. She could lift heavy things and work for hours without tiring. She was becoming someone new, someone capable and competent. As they worked, Wade said, "There's a dance in Redemption next Saturday. Town gets together once a month. Plays music, celebrates surviving another few weeks. You should come." Lillian's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't dance, didn't socialize, didn't know how to be around people in a casual, friendly way, but then she thought about the past weeks, about everything she had learned and done. Maybe it was time to learn this too. "I don't know anyone in town," she said hesitantly. "You know Mrs. Sullivan and the storekeeper and me." Wade was nailing boards together, not looking at her. "Besides, folks are curious about you. Might be good to let them see you're not some fragile Eastern lady who'll run back home at the first hardship." "Is that what they think I am?" "Some of them. Others think you're either crazy or remarkably brave." Wade did look at her then, his gray blue eyes serious. "I think you're brave. But it wouldn't hurt to let the town know you're planning to stay?" Lillian thought about it. Then she said, "All right, I'll come." The dance was held in the largest building in Redemption, which turned out to be the church. Someone had pushed the pews to the sides, and a group of men with fiddles and guitars were tuning their instruments. The whole town seemed to be there. From elderly couples to families with young children to cowboys who had ridden in from surrounding ranches. Lillian arrived with Wade, who had picked her up in his wagon. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Marcus had bought for her because it was modest and plain. On her, Marcus had said, anything else would be pretentious. But now, seeing the other women in their bright dresses and jewelry, Lillian felt drab and invisible. Wade seemed to sense her discomfort. "You look fine," he said quietly. "Better than fine." Mrs. Sullivan descended on them immediately, pulling Lillian away to introduce her to half a dozen other women. They were friendly but curious, asking questions about where she was from and whether she was really planning to live alone on that rough land, and wasn't she frightened? Lillian answered as best she could, aware that she was being evaluated, judged, categorized. These women would decide whether she was respectable enough to accept into their community. It was like being back in Gonzales, trying to meet Marcus's standards, and she felt herself withdrawing, becoming small and quiet. Then the music started, and Wade appeared at her elbow. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a question. He took her hand and led her to the center of the room before she could protest. The music was fast, a reel that had couples spinning and laughing, and Wade pulled her into it without hesitation. "I don't know how to dance," Lillian said, panicking. "Then I'll teach you. Just follow my lead." Wade's hand was warm on her waist, his other hand holding hers firmly. He guided her through the steps, patient when she stumbled, encouraging when she got it right. After a few minutes, Lillian stopped thinking and just moved, letting the music and Wade's lead carry her. She had never danced before. Marcus had considered dancing frivolous and inappropriate, but now, spinning across the floor with Wade's steady presence anchoring her, Lillian felt something unfurl inside her chest. This was joy. This was what it felt like to be alive, to be part of something communal and celebratory. When the song ended, she was breathless and laughing. Wade smiled down at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart stutter. "See," he said, "you're a natural." They danced 3 more times that night. Between dances, Wade introduced Lillian to his friends and neighbors, ranchers and store owners and families who had lived in Redemption for years. Everyone was friendly, accepting Wade's implicit endorsement of her as sufficient reason to welcome her. As the evening wore on, Lillian realized something. These people weren't judging her the way the people in Gonzales had. They didn't care about appearances or propriety or whether she measured up to some impossible standard. They cared about whether she was willing to work hard and be a good neighbor. That was all. The last dance of the night was slow, and Wade held her closer than before. Lillian could feel the heat of his body, the strength in his arms. She rested her hand on his shoulder and let herself lean into him slightly, feeling safe in a way she never had before. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," she said quietly. "I'm glad you came." Wade's voice was low, meant only for her. "You looked like you were having a good time." "I am." Lillian looked up at him, at his weathered face and kind eyes. "You've been so good to me, Wade. I don't know how to repay you." "I don't want repayment." Wade was quiet for a moment, then said, "Lillian, I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, the music ended and people started gathering their things to leave. The moment passed and Wade stepped back, releasing her. They rode back to Lillian's house in silence, the wagon rattling over the dark prairie. When they arrived, Wade helped her down and walked her to her door. "What were you going to say?" Lillian asked. "At the dance?" Wade looked at her for a long moment. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and serious. "Just that I'm glad you came to Redemption, that's all." But Lillian knew it wasn't all. There was something unspoken between them, something growing and shifting. She could feel it in the way Wade looked at her, in the way her heart raced when he was near. She didn't have a name for it yet, but it was there, undeniable. "Good night, Wade," she said softly. "Good night, Lillian." After that night, something changed between them. Wade still came by regularly to help with projects around the house, but now there was an awareness that hadn't been there before. Lillian caught herself watching him as he worked, noticing the way his muscles moved under his shirt, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. She thought about the dance, about the feel of his arms around her, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. She also felt afraid. She had sworn she wouldn't let herself become dependent on a man again. But Wade wasn't Marcus. He didn't try to control her or diminish her. He made her feel capable, valued, seen. Was it possible to care for someone without losing yourself in the process? October arrived with cooler weather and the promise of rain. Wade helped Lillian prepare her house for winter, checking the roof and chimney, making sure she had enough firewood stacked. He brought over the chickens he had promised, and Lillian learned to feed them and collect their eggs and protect them from predators. One afternoon, as they were repairing a section of fence, Wade said, "I've been thinking about expanding my herd. There's good grazing land on the north edge of my property, but I'd need to build a line shack out there for the winter months. Keep an eye on the cattle." "That sounds like a lot of work," Lillian said. "It is, but it would also mean more income. I could hire another hand or two, really make the ranch profitable." Wade paused, then added, "I'm building something I can be proud of, something that will last." Lillian understood what he wasn't saying. Wade was building a future, something solid and permanent. He was establishing himself, proving he was worthy of more than just survival. "You should do it," she said. "You've worked hard for what you have. You deserve to see it grow." Wade looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "What about you? What are you building, Lillian?" The question caught her off guard. She looked around at her little house, at the land stretching out in all directions, at the life she had created from nothing. "I don't know. I came here to escape, to be free, but maybe that's not enough anymore." What would be enough? Lillian thought about Marcus's house in Gonzales, about the suffocating emptiness of that life. Then she thought about dancing with Wade, about learning to shoot a rifle and build a chicken coop and survive on her own. Something real, she said finally, something that's mine, not because someone gave it to me or because I have no other choice, but because I chose it. And have you found that? I'm starting to. Wade stepped closer to her. They were standing by the fence in the October afternoon, and there was no one around for miles. Lillian, I need to tell you something. I should have said it weeks ago, but I didn't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable. Lillian's heart was pounding. What is it? I care about you. More than I should, probably, given how recently you were widowed. But I can't help it. You're brave and strong, and you don't let anything stop you. You're building a life out here alone, and I admire that. But I also wish you weren't alone. I wish you'd let me be part of your life, not just as a neighbor, but as something more. Lillian stared at him, unable to speak. Everything she had feared and hoped for was there in his words. Wade Quinn, this good man who had taught her carpentry and shooting and how to laugh again, wanted to be with her. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. My marriage to Marcus, it wasn't based on love or affection. It was about control and appearance. I don't know what a real relationship looks like. I don't know if I can be what you need. You don't have to be anything except yourself. Wade took her hands in his grip warm and solid. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or even next year. I'm just asking if you might consider letting me court you properly. Let me take you to town for Sunday dinners. Let me call on you without the excuse of fixing your roof. Let me show you what it's like to be with someone who sees you as an equal, not a possession. Tears were running down Lillian's face. She hadn't realized she was crying until Wade reached up and gently wiped them away. I'm so afraid, she admitted. Afraid of losing myself again, afraid of becoming dependent, afraid that what I feel for you is just gratitude and not something real. What do you feel for me? Wade asked gently. Lillian took a shaky breath. Happy, safe, challenged in a good way. Like I'm becoming the person I was always supposed to be. When I see your wagon coming across the prairie, my whole day gets brighter. When you're not here, I find myself thinking about what I want to tell you, what I want to share. I miss you when you're gone, and I look forward to when you'll come back. I don't know what to call that, but it's real. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. Wade's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his weathered face. That sounds like love to me, Lillian, at least the beginning of it. Is it possible to fall in love with someone without even realizing it's happening? I think that's the best way to fall in love. Slowly, naturally, built on respect and friendship. Not the dramatic passion in storybooks, but something deeper and more lasting. Wade squeezed her hands. Your first marriage was a prison without bars. Let me show you that love can be freedom instead, that being with someone can make you more yourself, not less. Lillian looked into Wade's gray-blue eyes and saw nothing but honesty and hope. She thought about the past months, about how much she had changed and grown. She had learned to be independent, to stand on her own. But maybe true strength wasn't about being alone. Maybe it was about choosing who to let into your life and trusting them to treat that gift with care. Yes, she said. I'd like that. I'd like you to court me properly. Wade's grin was brilliant. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close but gently, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. But Lillian didn't want to pull away. She wrapped her arms around Wade's waist and rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was what safety felt like. Not the stifling control Marcus had called protection, but the freedom to be vulnerable without fear of being hurt. This was what love could be. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the October afternoon while the wind whispered through the grass around them. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Lillian had experienced before. Wade came by twice a week, always with a reason, a repair that needed doing or supplies he thought she might need, but really just to see her. They worked together on various projects, but they also talked for hours sitting on her porch as the sun set and sharing their thoughts, dreams, and fears. Wade told her about growing up poor in Colorado, about watching his father struggle to make ends meet and vowing to build something better for himself. He told her about coming to Texas and the loneliness of those first years working for other people and saving every penny. He told her about the day he bought his land and how he had stood in the middle of it and felt like a king. Lillian told him about the orphanage in San Antonio, about the cold efficiency of the nuns who ran it, and the way she had learned to make herself invisible to avoid their disapproval. She told him about meeting Marcus when she was 18, how he had seemed sophisticated and kind at first, how she hadn't realized until after the wedding that his kindness was just a mask for his need to control. She told him about the 5 years of careful silence, of slowly disappearing until she wasn't sure if there was anything left of herself worth saving. "But you saved yourself," Wade said after she finished. "He tried to break you, and you refused to stay broken." "I didn't feel brave at the time. I just felt desperate." Bravery and desperation look the same from the outside. What matters is you survived, and you're here now, building a new life. Wade took her hand, threading his fingers through hers, and I'm grateful for that, because it means I got to meet you. In November, Wade started taking Lillian to town every Sunday after church. They would have dinner at the hotel restaurant, and Wade would introduce her to more of his friends and neighbors. Lillian grew more comfortable in social situations, learning to laugh and talk without constantly monitoring herself for mistakes. The people of Redemption accepted her fully now, no longer seeing her as an outsider but as one of their own. She also started spending time at Wade's ranch. It was larger and more established than her little homestead, with a proper ranch house and barns and corrals full of horses. Mrs. Chen, Wade's housekeeper, was a quiet Chinese woman in her 40s who welcomed Lillian with genuine warmth. Her husband, Mr. Chen, managed Wade's horses with the skill of someone who had been working with animals his entire life. The ranch was impressive, a testament to Wade's hard work and determination, but what impressed Lillian most was the way Wade treated the Chens, not as servants, but as valued partners. He asked their opinions, respected their expertise, and paid them fairly. It was another example of who Wade was, a man who saw people as equals regardless of their position. One Sunday in late November, Wade asked Lillian if she would like to go riding with him. She hesitated, admitting that she had never learned to ride properly. Marcus had considered it unladylike. "Then it's time you learned," Wade said. "Can't live in Texas and not know how to ride a horse?" He saddled a gentle mare for her and spent the afternoon teaching her the basics. Lillian was nervous at first, but the mare was patient and Wade was encouraging, and by the end of the day she was trotting across the prairie with something approaching confidence. "You're a natural," Wade called as she circled back to where he sat on his own horse. "You say that about everything I learn," Lillian laughed. "That's because it's true. You pick things up fast and you're not afraid to try." Wade guided his horse next to hers. "I've been thinking about something and I want to run it by you." "What is it?" "Your land. 200 acres isn't enough to ranch on, but it borders my property on the south. If you were interested, we could combine our lands, work them together as one operation." Lillian's first instinct was to refuse. The land was hers, her only asset, her security. But then she thought about what Wade was really offering. Not to take her land, but to share resources, to build something together. It was a partnership, not a takeover. "How would that work?" she asked carefully. "We'd keep the deeds separate. Your land stays yours, mine stays mine. But we'd manage them as one ranch, share the work and the profits. If you ever wanted to leave or do something different, you'd still have your land to fall back on." Wade met her eyes steadily. "I'm not trying to take anything from you, Lillian. I'm trying to build something with you, but only if you want to." Lillian thought about the past months, about everything she had learned and accomplished. She had proven to herself that she could survive alone. But surviving wasn't the same as thriving. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of losing her independence and start embracing what she could build with someone else. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." They spent December planning the combined operation. Wade showed Lillian how to read the land, where the best grazing was, where water collected during rains. He taught her about cattle ranching, about breeding and branding and driving herds to market. He included her in every decision, asking her opinion and listening when she spoke. Lillian felt herself changing. She was no longer the quiet, frightened woman who had arrived in Redemption 4 months earlier. She was confident now, capable, full of ideas and energy. She had opinions, and she voiced them. She laughed freely and often. She had learned what it meant to be herself without apology, and she had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Wade Quinn. It had happened so gradually that she couldn't pinpoint a specific moment. But somewhere between learning to shoot a rifle and dancing at the church and planning their ranch operation, she had given Wade her heart. Not because she was lonely or desperate or had no other choice, but because he had shown her what love could be. Respectful, supportive, freeing. He had taught her that being with someone didn't mean losing yourself. It meant becoming more fully who you were meant to be. On Christmas Day, Wade invited Lillian to spend the day at his ranch. Mrs. Chin had cooked a feast, and they ate together at Wade's table, the 4 of them, laughing and talking like a family. Afterward, Wade asked Lillian to walk with him. They went out to the paddock where Wade's horses were kept. The December air was cool but not cold, and the sky was a brilliant blue. Wade leaned against the fence, looking out at his land, and Lillian stood beside him, content just to be near him. "I have something for you," Wade said. He pulled a small wrapped package from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Lillian opened it carefully. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple but beautiful, engraved with a pattern of intertwined vines. She looked up at Wade, speechless. "It's not much," Wade said, "but I wanted you to have something that was just yours. Something you chose to accept, not something someone forced on you." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful. Thank you." Wade took the bracelet and fastened it around her wrist. His hands were gentle, his touch warm. When he finished, he didn't let go of her hand. "Lillian, I know it's only been a few months. I know you're still healing from everything Mark has put you through, but I need you to know how I feel." Wade turned to face her fully, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "I love you. I love your strength and your courage and your kindness. I love the way you laugh when you succeed at something new. I love the way you look at the world like it's full of possibilities. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what real love looks like." Lillian's heart was racing. She had known this was coming, had felt it building between them, but hearing the words still took her breath away. "I'm not asking you to marry me right now," Wade continued. "I know you need time, but I want you to know my intentions. When you're ready, if you're ready, I want to be your husband. Not to own you or control you, but to partner with you, to build a life together where we're both free to be ourselves." "Wade?" Lillian's voice was shaking. "I love you too. I think I've loved you since the first day you brought lumber to fix my door, but I was too scared to admit it. You've shown me what it means to be truly free, not free from responsibilities or connections, but free to choose, free to be myself, free to love without fear. Then marry me." Wade said it simply, directly. "Not today, not even next month, but someday when you're ready. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel trapped or controlled or invisible again." Lillian looked at the man before her, Wade Quinn, with his weathered face and kind eyes and steady presence. He had been patient with her fears, supportive of her independence, and generous with his time and resources. He had taught her carpentry and shooting and ranching, but more than that, he had taught her that she was worthy of love, real love, the kind that lifted you up instead of weighing you down. Her first marriage had been a prison without bars, but Wade's love had become her first true freedom. "Yes," she said, "yes, I'll marry you. Not someday, soon. Because I don't want to wait anymore. I've spent too much of my life afraid and small and silent. I want to start living fully with you as soon as possible." Wade's smile was radiant. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, full of promise and passion and hope. Lillian kissed him back, letting herself feel everything she had denied herself for so long: joy, desire, connection, love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure? I don't want to rush you." "I'm sure." Lillian cupped his face in her hands. "I've never been more sure of anything. You're not Marcus. You're nothing like him. And what I feel for you is nothing like what I felt in my first marriage. This is real. This is right. And I don't want to waste another moment of my life being afraid." They were married in February of 1879, 6 months after Lillian had arrived in Redemption. The wedding was small, held in the same church where they had first danced together. Mrs. Sullivan stood as Lillian's witness, and Mr. Chen stood for Wade. The whole town came to celebrate, filling the church with music and laughter. Lillian wore a new dress, pale yellow with lace at the collar and cuffs. Wade had insisted on buying it for her, taking her to the general store and telling her to choose whatever she liked. She had protested at first, not wanting to be dependent on him financially, but Wade had been firm. "This is a gift," he had said, "not payment or obligation. I want to give you something beautiful because it makes me happy to see you happy. That's all." So Lillian had chosen the yellow dress, and when she walked down the aisle toward Wade, she saw his eyes light up in a way that made her feel beautiful for the first time in her life. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When the preacher asked if she took Wade to be her husband, Lillian said yes without hesitation. And when Wade slipped a gold band on her finger, she knew she was making a choice, not accepting a fate. This was what freedom felt like. After the wedding, there was a celebration at the hotel. There was food and music and dancing, and Lillian found herself swept up in it all, laughing and spinning and feeling more alive than she had ever felt. Wade stayed by her side the entire time, his hand at her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. "Happy?" he asked as they danced together. "Deliriously so." Lillian smiled up at him. "I didn't know life could feel like this." "Like what?" "Light. Full. Like everything is possible." "Everything is possible," Wade said. "We'll make it so." They left the celebration early, both eager to start their new life together. Lillian had moved her few possessions to Wade's ranch the week before, and as they drove through the February night toward their home, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen it. She had chosen Wade, and he had chosen her, and together they would build something lasting. Their wedding night was tender and patient. Wade took his time, making sure Lillian was comfortable, that she felt safe and cherished. He erased the bad memories of her first marriage with every gentle touch, every whispered word of love. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Lillian felt reborn. She was no longer the frightened girl Marcus had married, or even the determined woman who had arrived in Redemption. She was Lillian Quinn, partner and wife and herself, fully and completely. The months that followed were busy and fulfilling. Lillian and Wade worked together to expand the ranch, combining their lands into one thriving operation. They built new corrals and repaired fences and purchased more cattle. Lillian learned the business side of ranching, keeping books and managing finances with the same competence she brought to everything else. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch of their house and watch the sun set over their land. Wade would hold Lillian's hand and tell her about his day, asking about hers, sharing plans and dreams. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in their companionship. Sometimes they would go riding together across the prairie, racing their horses and laughing like children. Sometimes they would work side by side, mending tack or grooming horses or tending to chores. Sometimes they would just be together, reading or playing cards or sitting in comfortable silence. It was everything a marriage should be: partnership, friendship, love, passion. Lillian had never imagined she could be this happy, this fulfilled. Wade had shown her what freedom truly meant, and she had embraced it with both hands. In June, Lillian realized she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening as they sat on the porch, nervous about his reaction. They hadn't discussed children yet, hadn't planned for them, but Wade's face lit up with joy. "A baby? We're going to have a baby?" "Yes, sometime in early winter, I think." Wade pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "That's wonderful. That's amazing. We're going to be parents." Lillian relaxed into his embrace, relieved by his enthusiasm. "You're happy about this?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." Wade pulled back to look at her, his hands cradling her face. "You've given me so much already, Lillian. A partner, a friend, someone to share my life with, and now a child. I can't think of anything better." They spent the summer preparing for the baby. Wade built a cradle, working on it in the evenings with careful precision. Lillian sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands steady as she stitched. Mrs. Chen gave her advice about pregnancy and childbirth, sharing wisdom from her own experience raising 3 children in China before coming to America. As Lillian's belly grew, so did her sense of wonder. She was creating new life, bringing a child into a world where she was loved and free and herself. This baby would never know what it was like to live in fear, to be controlled or diminished. This baby would be raised by parents who loved each other, who treated each other as equals, who built each other up instead of tearing each other down. In December of 1879, on a cold night with stars bright in the sky, Lillian gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, but Wade stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Wade cried openly. "He's perfect," Wade said, looking down at his son with awe. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him William, after Wade's father. William Quinn, born into freedom and love, the first fruit of their partnership. Lillian held her son in her arms and felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She had come to Texas broken and desperate, running from a marriage that had nearly destroyed her. She had built a new life from nothing, learning to be strong and independent and herself, and then she had met Wade, who had shown her that love didn't have to mean losing yourself, that the right person would make you more, not less. Her first marriage had been a prison without bars, but Wade's love had become her first true freedom. And now, holding their son, she knew that freedom would extend to the next generation. William would grow up knowing he was loved unconditionally, that his voice mattered, that he could be whoever he wanted to be. "Thank you," she whispered to Wade. "For what?" "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for teaching me I was worth more than I believed, for loving me in a way that set me free." Wade kissed her forehead gently. "I should be thanking you. You took a chance on me, on us, when you had every reason to never trust another man again. You're the bravest person I know, Lillian Quinn." As they sat together with their newborn son, Lillian thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the orphanage in San Antonio to Marcus's house in Gonzales to the little homestead outside Redemption to this ranch that was now her home. Every step had been necessary, even the painful ones. They had shaped her, taught her, made her who she was. And who she was, she realized, was someone who had learned to choose her own path, someone who had discovered her own strength, someone who had found love, not as a cage, but as wings. The years that followed were full of joy and hard work and growth. The ranch prospered under their joint management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the area. Lillian proved to have a head for business, negotiating fair prices for their cattle and building relationships with buyers across Texas. William grew into a lively, curious child who loved horses and exploring the ranch. In 1881, Lillian gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, and 2 years after that, another son they named James. The house that had once held just Wade and the Chens now rang with children's laughter and the controlled chaos of family life. Lillian thrived as a mother. She was patient and loving, but also firm, teaching her children to be independent and capable. She made sure Caroline learned the same skills as her brothers, refusing to limit her daughter based on gender. And she made sure all three children understood that their voices mattered, that they were valued for who they were, not what they could produce or how well they obeyed. Wade was an equally devoted father. He taught his children to ride and rope and work with cattle. He also taught them to read and write and think critically. He treated them with respect, listening to their opinions and explaining his decisions. He showed them, through example, what it meant to be a good partner, a good parent, a good person. In 1885, Lillian opened a small school in Redemption. She had discovered she loved teaching when working with her own children, and she knew there were other families in the area who struggled to educate their children. The school was simple, just one room in a building Wade helped her construct, but it filled a real need. Lillian taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical skills. She welcomed all students regardless of their family's means, accepting payment in the form of goods or labor when cash wasn't available. The school became a cornerstone of the community, and Lillian took pride in watching her students learn and grow. Wade supported her fully in this endeavor, never once suggesting that she should focus solely on being a wife and mother. He understood that Lillian needed more than domesticity to be fulfilled, that she had talents and passions that deserved expression. He watched the children when she was teaching, managed the ranch when she was preparing lessons, and celebrated her successes as if they were his own. This was the partnership they had built, not one where one person sacrificed for the other, but one where both people lifted each other up, where both people were free to pursue their dreams because they knew they had a partner who believed in them. As the 1880s progressed, Redemption grew from a struggling frontier town into a thriving community. New families arrived, new businesses opened, and the railroad finally extended a line to connect them to larger markets. Through it all, Lillian and Wade remained central figures, respected not just for their successful ranch, but for their generosity and leadership. They helped new settlers get established, offered advice and resources to those struggling, and advocated for improvements to the town. Lillian served on the school board and organized community events. Wade worked with other ranchers to establish fair practices and protect their collective interests. Together they made a difference in the lives of countless people. But their greatest legacy was their children. William grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind. He took over more responsibility on the ranch as he got older, showing a natural talent for managing livestock and working with the land. Caroline became a gifted teacher herself, working alongside her mother at the school and eventually taking it over when Lillian decided to scale back her teaching to focus on other projects. James, the youngest, had his father's love of horses and became an expert trainer, earning a reputation across Texas for his skill and patience. In 1890, on the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Wade took Lillian back to the little house where she had first lived. It was still standing, though they had long since moved to the larger ranch house. They had kept it maintained as a reminder of where they had started, and occasionally used it when working in that part of the property. They sat on the porch as the sun set, just as they had done so many times over the years. Wade took Lillian's hand, the silver bracelet he had given her all those years ago still circling her wrist. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked her, "choosing this life? Choosing me?" Lillian looked at her husband, at the gray threading through his dark hair and the lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling and squinting in the sun. He was 43 now and she was 35, and they had built a life together that surpassed anything she had imagined possible. "Never," she said, "not for a single moment. You gave me freedom, Wade, not just from Marcus, but from my own fears and limitations. You showed me who I could be, and then you stood beside me while I became that person. How could I regret that?" "You gave me the same gift," Wade said. I thought I needed to prove I could do everything alone, that asking for help or sharing my life was a weakness. But you taught me that partnership makes us stronger, not weaker. That love is something we build together, not something we take from each other. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from blue to pink to purple. Around them, the land they had worked together stretched out in all directions, their land, their ranch, their legacy. "Remember when you first came here?" Wade said. "You were so determined, so scared, trying so hard to be brave." "I remember. I thought I needed to be alone to be free. I didn't understand that the right kind of love is what makes freedom possible." "Your first marriage was a prison without bars," Wade said softly, repeating words Lillian had once used to describe that time. "I'm just grateful I got the chance to show you what real freedom feels like." Lillian squeezed his hand. "You did more than show me. You lived it with me. We built it together." As the stars began to appear overhead, they rose and walked back toward their home. Their children would be waiting for them, along with Mrs. Chen and Mr. Chen, who were now more family than employees. There would be dinner and conversation and laughter, the comfortable rhythms of a life well lived. Lillian looked back once at the little house where her new life had begun. It seemed so small now, but it had been exactly what she needed at the time. A place to start over, to discover who she was without Marcus's control. A foundation on which to build something lasting. She had been terrified when she first arrived in Redemption, running from a past that had nearly broken her. She had thought survival was the best she could hope for, but she had been wrong. She hadn't just survived, she had thrived. She had found love and partnership and purpose. She had raised 3 beautiful children and built a successful ranch and helped create a strong community. She had become a teacher, a leader, a force for good in her corner of Texas, and she had done it all as herself, fully and completely, not as someone's possession or someone's idea of who she should be, but as Lillian Quinn, a woman who had learned that true freedom comes not from being alone, but from being loved in a way that lets you soar. Her first marriage had been a prison without bars, but Wade's love had become her first true freedom. And in that freedom, she had discovered not just who she was, but who she was meant to be. As they walked back to their house, Wade's arm around her shoulders and the Texas night settling around them, Lillian felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the man who walked beside her, for the life they had built together. She was free. She was loved. She was home. And that, she thought, was the greatest gift of all. William married in 1894, bringing his wife Sarah to live on the ranch. Sarah was a strong, capable woman who fit seamlessly into the Quinn family, and Lillian welcomed her with open arms. It was a joy to see her son so obviously in love, building the kind of partnership with Sarah that Lillian and Wade had modeled for him. Caroline continued teaching, eventually marrying one of the town's lawyers in 1896. She remained passionate about education, advocating for better schools and more resources for students across Texas. James married a neighboring rancher's daughter in 1898, and together they started their own small ranch adjacent to the Quinn property, continuing the family tradition. By the turn of the century, Lillian and Wade were grandparents 4 times over, with William and Sarah producing 2 sons and Caroline giving birth to twin daughters. The ranch house was often full of family. 3 generations gathered around the table for Sunday dinners, and Lillian marveled at how far she had come from that lonely girl in Marcus's house. Wade was 60 in 1905, and Lillian was 47. They had slowed down somewhat, letting William take over more of the daily ranch operations while Wade focused on strategic planning and Lillian devoted more time to her school and community work. But they were still active, still engaged, still deeply in love. One evening that summer, they rode out together to the far edge of their property, to a spot where they could see for miles in every direction. They dismounted and stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "We've had a good life," Wade said. "The best life," Lillian agreed. "And do you remember that first day I met you? You were so determined to see your land, even though everyone told you it was foolish. I remember. You thought I was crazy too at first. Maybe a little, Wade admitted with a smile. But mostly I thought you were brave, and I was right. Lillian leaned against him, comfortable in his solid presence. I've been thinking about writing a book, about my experiences, about what I learned. Maybe it could help other women who are trapped like I was. That's a wonderful idea. You should do it. You don't think it's presumptuous to think my story matters? Wade turned to face her, his hands on her shoulders. Lillian, your story matters more than you know. You survived something terrible and came out stronger. You built a new life from nothing. You proved that women can be independent and capable and successful on their own terms. That's a story worth telling. So Lillian began writings. She spent her mornings at her desk, putting her experiences into words. It was harder than she expected, dredging up memories of Marcus and that dark time in her life. But it was also cathartic, a way of claiming her past and transforming it into something useful. The book was published in 1907 by a small press in Austin. It was called Freedom Found: One Woman's Journey from Captivity to Independence, and it told Lillian's story with honesty and grace. She didn't dwell on the darkness of her first marriage, but she didn't shy away from it either. She wrote about fear and control and the slow erosion of self that happened in abusive relationships. But mostly she wrote about healing, about learning to trust again, to love again, to believe in herself again. She wrote about the kindness of strangers who became friends, about the importance of community, about the transformative power of real love. She wrote about Wade, about how he had shown her that partnership could be freeing rather than confining. The book found an audience beyond anything Lillian had imagined. Women across Texas and beyond wrote to her, thanking her for putting their experiences into words, for showing them that escape and healing were possible. Some came to visit seeking advice or just wanting to meet the woman who had written so honestly about survival and redemption. Lillian welcomed them all. She shared her story, offered what wisdom she could, and connected women who needed resources with people who could help. She became an advocate for women's rights and education, using her platform to push for changes in laws and attitudes. Wade supported her every step of the way, proud of what she had accomplished, and happy to see her making such a difference. He never felt threatened by her success or jealous of the attention she received. He had always believed in her potential, and watching her realize it fully was one of his greatest joys. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep satisfaction. The ranch remained successful, now being run primarily by William and James, with Wade serving as an advisor. Lillian's school had expanded, with Carolyn overseeing 3 satellite locations throughout the county. The family grew as grandchildren became teenagers and great-grandchildren began to arrive. In 1915, Wade fell ill. It was pneumonia, common enough but dangerous for a man of 72. Lillian nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave him. Their children and grandchildren came to visit, filling the house with love and concern. Wade recovered, but slowly. As he regained his strength, lying in bed with Lillian beside him, he said, "I'm not ready to leave you yet." "Good, because I'm not ready to let you go." "We've had more than 35 years together. That's more than most people get." "It's not enough. It will never be enough." Lillian took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and strength. "You're my heart, Wade Quinn. You saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving." "You saved yourself," Wade corrected gently. "I just gave you a safe place to land. You gave me everything. Love, partnership, freedom. You showed me what it meant to be truly myself, and I have loved every moment of our life together." Wade pulled her down to lie beside him on the bed. They held each other. 2 people who had chosen each other every day for more than 3 decades, whose love had only deepened with time. "Promise me something," Wade said. "Anything. If I go first, don't stop living. Don't go back to being small or scared or silent. Keep being the incredible woman you've become. Keep teaching and writing and making a difference. Live fully for both of us." Lillian was crying now. "I promise. But you're going to be fine. You're going to recover, and we're going to have many more years together." And she was right. Wade did recover, though he never quite regained his former vigor. He slowed down even more after that, content to spend his days with Lillian, watching their family flourish, enjoying the life they had built. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919. The entire town of Redemption, along with what seemed like half of Texas, came to celebrate with them. There were speeches and toasts and dancing, and Lillian and Wade stood at the center of it all, surrounded by the people whose lives they had touched. 40 years, Wade said as they danced together, moving slowly to accommodate his age and weaker health. 40 years of loving you. Best decision I ever made. Mine too, Lillian said. Every day with you has been a gift. They danced until Wade was tired, then sat together and watched their family. William and Sarah, Carolyn and her husband, James and his wife, all dancing with their own children. 3 generations of Quinns, all there because Lillian had been brave enough to leave Gonzales, and Wade had been kind enough to see her worth. As the party wound down and the stars came out, Wade and Lillian returned to their house. They sat on the porch, as they had done thousands of times over the years, and looked out at the land they had worked together. "Do you remember what you said to me that first Christmas?" Lillian asked. "You said you wanted to show me what real love looked like." "I remember. You kept that promise. Every single day, you showed me. And you changed my life, Wade. You gave me freedom when I thought I'd never be free again." Wade squeezed her hand. "We gave each other freedom. That's what real love does. It doesn't cage or control. It lifts up and sets free." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had spent 40 years building a life together, who had created not just a family but a legacy. Around them, the Texas night was full of stars and the sound of crickets and the rustle of wind through grass. Lillian thought about the girl she had been, arriving in Redemption with nothing but a land deed and desperate hope. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and capable and loved. She thought about Marcus and how his attempt to break her had ultimately led her to Wade, to freedom, to herself. Her first marriage had been a prison without bars, but Wade's love had become her first true freedom. And in that freedom, she had built a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. She had learned that love didn't have to mean losing yourself, that the right partner made you more, not less. That true freedom came not from being alone, but from being with someone who wanted you to soar. As they sat together under the Texas stars, Lillian felt a completeness that encompassed her entire life. All the pain and fear and struggle had been worth it because they had led her here, to this porch, this man, this life. She was free. She was loved. She was herself, fully and completely. And that was everything. Wade lived until 1925, passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82. Lillian was devastated by his loss, but she kept the promise she had made to him. She continued teaching, writing, and advocating for women's rights. She remained active in her community and involved with her family. She lived fully and vibrantly, honoring Wade's memory by being the woman he had always believed she could be. She wrote a second book, this one about partnership and love, dedicated to Wade. It was published on what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary, and it became even more successful than her first book. In it, she wrote about how real love was transformative, how the right partner could help you become your best self rather than diminishing you. Lillian lived to be 81, passing away in 1933 surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. By then, the Quinn Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in Texas, and Lillian's schools had educated thousands of students. Her books had inspired countless women to leave abusive situations and claim their own freedom. But her greatest legacy was simpler than all that. It was the example she and Wade had set of what love could be, of partnership and respect and mutual support, of two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other day after day, year after year. Her first marriage had been a prison without bars, but Wade's love had become her first true freedom. And in that freedom, Lillian Crawford Quinn had discovered not just who she was, but what was possible when two people truly loved each other. She had learned that freedom wasn't about being alone. It was about being with someone who wanted you to fly, and she had flown higher and farther than she ever dreamed possible.